Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Dungeon Dive, we're taking a look at a new game that was recently delivered from Kickstarter, and that is You Meet in a Tavern, You Die in a Dungeon. Now, I was a backer of this game, and I did recently receive it probably a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I finally had a chance to check it out and kind of test the waters to see what it's all about. So I don't know if physical editions are available still, but this game is available on itch.io. And all you really need to play as far as the game materials go are these 3 zines. And so if you buy the PDFs, you can follow my super detailed guide on creating your own zines. I'll post a link to that above and below so you can check that out. This would be a very, very easy game to DIY your own set. Now, the Kickstarter edition did come with a deck of cards, but you don't need this deck of cards at all. This deck of cards basically just recreates all of the information in one of the books. And to play without the official deck of cards, all you need is a standard deck of playing cards, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I bought You Meet in a Tavern, You Die in a Dungeon to play solo, because that's basically how I play all of my games. And while this is definitely a game you can play solo, it has some solo rules in it. There's nothing that would prevent you from playing this solo. I think that this game would actually shine in a group environment with other players because of the theme of the game. In this game, one player is going to be the dungeon keeper. The other players will be the dungeoneers, the heroes, the explorers. And like the title says, all of the dungeoneers will meet in a tavern. They will hear about a dungeon, a quest in a dungeon. They will go to that dungeon, work their way through the dungeon, and at some point they will die in the dungeon. And describing how your character dies at the hands of what kind of beast or what kind of trap or magical thing they die at is part of the game. And so I think this game would benefit from that kind of the joking camaraderie of different players around a table. Where I think this game would shine brightest is in some kind of convention setting or a one-off game, maybe something to play before or after a more serious game. And I think that people will have a lot of fun with that. So the game is broken up into 3 different books. We have the Dungeon Manual, which describes all of the hazards and different things the heroes are going to face in the dungeon. We have the Dungeoneer's Handbook, which is the player's handbook, basically, and that describes all of your characters and how to play as a player. And then we have the Dungeon Keeper's Guide, and this is for your DM, your Dungeon Keeper, your Game Master, and this will give you all of the information you need to run the game, along with some information about how to play solo, some variations on the game, and also a bunch of charts to use to generate some things, a bunch of prompts. So let's start by taking a look at the Dungeon Keeper's Guide here. So the books are really well written, and I think they are especially written for people new to the genre of tabletop RPGs. There are a lot of there's a lot of advice given in this book about how to run it, and some prompts and ideas if you're stuck. It's definitely written from that point of view, and that's why I do think that it's a really good one-off game or a really good convention game, something that you can pick up quickly, you can learn very quickly and learn. It's a pleasant game to learn, and you can be up and running in just a matter of minutes. But to play the game, you will need a handful of D6, and then each of the heroes will need a D12. You will need a standard deck of playing cards, or if you have it, your dungeon, your official deck, and the Dungeon Manual, because the Dungeon Manual replaces that official deck, and a few things to write things down. Basically, some index cards would work because the characters are quite simple, and you don't need to keep track of a lot of numbers or a lot of stats. And so the first thing you do is you meet in a tavern. And so this part of the manual here of the Dungeon Keeper's Guide will tell you how to set up your tavern, what you are doing in the tavern, and then how to have the barkeep. You will play a scene with the characters once they introduce themselves, where the barkeep or another patron in the tavern will tell the heroes about this dungeon, about this quest that they need to go on. And then you can quickly generate the dungeon, or at least generate a backstory for the dungeon, what the location is, a dungeon entrance, the goal, and the boon. For instance, here we might have the Frostmire Peaks, and the dungeon location is a towering frozen mountain. The dungeon entrance is a vast charred tree. The quest goal is to find the Archphase crown, and the quest boon is your heart's desire. But none of that really matters. Those are all MacGuffins because the characters are not going to survive to reach their goal or to enjoy their quest boon. It's just something that the Dungeoneers will use to entice their heroes while they are going on this adventure. And then it does give you some various ways to introduce the quest to the players. You can roll a d6. So there are a lot of useful charts in here. And the final thing that the Dungeon Keeper will do is give each of the heroes, each of the Dungeoneers or the players, a destined death. And that death will have to do with certain tags and hazards. And so when a player loses enough of their destiny points, or when they choose to do so, if they are facing off against one of those tags or one of those hazards, they can decide to stage their Dungeoneer's death at that point. And that's where we get into the you die in a dungeon section. So this covers all of your rules for controlling your dungeon. And basically what you do is it's kind of a point crawl from one room to the next. And each one of these cards is a different room, or you can always draw from a standard deck of cards and just use the suit and the number for that deck and refer to the Dungeoneering manual, the dungeon manual. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But for the Dungeon Keeper, you'll take your deck and you will shuffle it, and the players will enter a first room and you'll draw that card, and hey, they have found a kitchen. And then it gives you some suggestions of maybe what they find in that kitchen, some cut stone walls, shelves of jars and moldy food, a cast iron pot over a cold fire pit, or some rotten cupboards and cabinets, maybe some sticky spills of smears of grease. So you don't have to read all of those, but that will give the Dungeon Keeper some ideas of what this kitchen is like. And then we have some suggested tags. And so these tags are kind of like keywords. So in this kitchen, there might be things associated with acid, with beasts, with fire, with ice, or humanoids. And then those will correspond to different hazards. So we have giant ant swarm, burning oil, frost elemental, and bandit. And then that will give you the suggested number of loot rolls that the heroes can roll on loot charts if they have defeated all of the hazards in that room. In order to progress from one room to the next, each hero has to at least successfully engage with each of the hazards in that room. They don't have to defeat the hazards, they just have to have a successful engagement with that hazard. And we'll talk about how that can happen as we look at the player manual. In order to get loot, the players need to defeat all of the hazards. And so when there are hazards left in a room, as long as they have engaged with them, they can move on to the next room. But if they want to get loot, and loot can kind of help the character survive for longer while they are in the dungeon. That might seem kind of counterintuitive because you know that your characters are going to die, but you're not playing, the Dungeoneers, the characters don't know they're going to die. The players know. And so the characters are going to want to survive as long as possible. But this gives you some examples of how to handle your hazards, how to play with playing with your hazard points. So hazard points are like hit points. Each hazard will have a certain number of hit points. And the characters can do damage depending on their class. They can do more or less damage to certain types of hazards. And I think that's a really cool system there. Tells you how to run around. The rounds are simple. If there were 3 heroes, each of the Dungeoneers would roll a d6, and then you would go in number order, starting with the lowest number first. That is their initiative order. All of the players will decide which hazard they want to engage with, what they're going to do, how they're going to try to overcome and conquer and beat that challenge. And then you go around the table. Each of the Dungeoneers takes a turn, and then all of the remaining hazards react. And as the hazards react, they will do damage to the hero's destiny. And when a hero's destiny reaches 0, in the next room or maybe in that same room, then you need to trigger that hero's death. And then the player can come up with some elaborate way that their hero falls to the dungeon and dies in the dungeon. And then everybody around the table can laugh about it. So it can be a lot of fun. So at the end of this book here, we get into the appendix section, and these are all of your random charts. So help, I need a tavern. So you have a D12 roll of coming up with a tavern name. The illegal Manticore is the name of our tavern here. And then here we can roll up on our what kind of tavern this is. So that would be a 6. It's a collegiate, so it has a bunch of wizards hanging out. It smells like incense and sulfur and copper. Light is sourceless light, arcane lightning or showering sparks. Decor, stone walls, low ceilings, alcoves, and twisting corridors. And then help, I need a dungeon keeper character. So here we can roll up a really simple character for an NPC or something that the heroes might meet in a dungeon. We have their demeanor, their quirks, and their mannerisms. So we could say that we find a 4. He's wearing a cable knit sweater, and they are grubby. So maybe the sweater is older, and it's an ogre. So some ogre wearing a grubby cable knit sweater. And his demeanor would be jaded, so maybe kind of mad about how grubby his sweater is. Melts into a puddle when not looking at directly. So that's a 6, actually. Wrong one. Exudes a rainbow smoke, and also constantly cleans while talking. So that's an example of just really quickly coming up with an NPC that you might need. And then it has a whole bunch of names too, if you needed to roll up on some names. Connections, help, I need it. So this is for the connections here. Help, I need a dungeon, connections. So these are various connections that the players can establish between themselves, because one of the things that players will do is when they meet in a tavern, they will come up with a connection between each one of them. And so you could randomly draw a card here, a 7, picked up a package that was meant for your dungeoneers. So one of the other dungeoneers accidentally picked up a package that was meant for you. So that would be your connection between you and another player. Accidentally sent your dungeoneer to hell. Man, how did that happen? That would be a good connection to have with another player who is maybe a magic user or something like that. And then we get into our section here about creating dungeons. So we have a D12 dungeon location, dungeon entrance, the quest goal, and the quest boon. So all of those are D12 rolls. So maybe we have a 9. It's a lightning plagued valley, and the entrance is a colossal shattered tomb. The goal of the quest is a god's macerated femur, and also the boon is omniscience. You could combine those to come up with some kind of quest. A lot of these charts, I think, are useful for the solo player, and not just this game, but in other games as well. And then the last thing you will do is you will give the players their destined death. And so this destined death chart will correspond to those tags. So each of the players will draw a card. You can flip that over. It's a 9. And a monster. So the monster tag will trigger that character's death when they want to, or when they reach 0 destiny. Or perhaps a mage will trigger that character's death, a queen, a trap, and so on. Now, as the characters lose their destiny, if they get down to 0 destiny, they should meet their end in the next room. And when that happens, they are supposed to tell the dungeon keeper one of their tags, or their destined death tag. And then the dungeon keeper will ensure that the next room includes that thing so that they can die. Then we also have different ways to generate dungeon rooms, such things as rowdy or violent, chaotic. How much time has transpired? How much time has passed between each room? Because between each room, you narrate a scene. So like gameplay things don't happen in between each room. The focus is a point crawl from one room to the next. But between each room, anywhere between 10 minutes and 8 hours will pass. And then you can also follow these prompts to have these kind of narrative scenes. So maybe they see something. So you could tell the players that maybe they see dragonfire scorched chamber along from one room to the next. Maybe they meet somebody to talk to, a lonely merchant, or maybe there's a problem to solve, a broken rope bridge, and so on. So that just gives you some different ways to handle narrative, kind of social scenes in between each room. And here we have all of our different ways to play. So you can play short games or long games, open games. You can have some different types of progression, or you can die on your own. And so that gives you some advice on how to play solo, and also advice on how to design your own rooms and your own hazards and challenges. So that is your book as the Dungeon Keeper. As the players, you will take the Dungeoneer's Handbook, or if you're playing solo, you will combine these two and read them both. And this gives you all of your information that you'll need to play the game as a Dungeoneer. What you need, basically just a index card to keep track of your character, what you are going to do in the tavern, and then how to create your Dungeoneer. So there are 5 different classes. We have fighters, magic users, priests, rangers, and thieves. There are only a handful of stats, actually only 3 stats. So we would have I'm going to write class here. And then, of course, we should come up with a name for our character. And then we have skill, luck, and destiny. So we have skill, luck, and destiny. Destiny always starts at 10 unless you roll really well on your skills. There's a little bit of a balancing mechanism on your stats. So basically for each stat, skill and luck, you roll 2d6. Okay, 4 for my skill, so I'm not very skillful. And we have luck, 8, so I'm pretty lucky. So if either of those was 10, then I would start with 3 fewer destiny. If both were 10, I would start with only 6 destiny. But since neither of those are 10, I start with 10 destiny points. Anything that I do in a dungeon as a player involves either skill or luck, and you have to roll a d12 low. You have to roll under your value. So to do something skillful, I would need to roll a 1, 2, or a 3. To do something lucky, I would need to roll a 1 through a 7. If you don't, then the hazard that you were trying to overcome damages your destiny. So it can be pretty difficult. With only 2 skills, you use skill if it pertains to something skillful that your character is doing. So let's say you were trying to jump a pit, and your character was a thief, and they were quick. Maybe they had some nice boots on. That would be a skillful roll, so you would want to roll under your skill. You know, if you were playing a big kind of burly barbarian who has no right to even attempt to jump across a big pit, then you would probably want to rely on your luck. So let's take a look at the different classes here, and you can get a feel for how the players will play their game. So we have fighters here. Here's some of the flavor text. Sword in hand, Gale steps into the encompassing dark before her. Her ears pick at the distant drip of water and the barely audible rumble of a creature's breathing. She pauses, listening, then takes a single step. A sharp click sounds into the darkness, followed by the grinding of gears. OF, Gale manages, before the bolt thuds into her skull. So a fighter has learned to get by with their strength, speed, and agility. This could be through years of battle, barroom brawls, or feats of athleticism. So this gives you some suggestions of how you could play a fighter in this game. Swing from the remnants of a broken chandelier to leap over a pit trap. Flex your muscles to charm or intimidate a creature. Lay waste with your weapons in a violent fury. Anything else you think is cool. And so when a fighter has a successful engagement with a hazard, if it is a beast, humanoid, or monster, they will automatically do 6 hazard points of damage to that thing. If it is an abomination, fire, or undead, they will do d6 damage to that thing. Everything else, they will do d3 damage to that thing. So each, as you can imagine, each of the different classes has a focus on what they can do the most damage to and what they do the least amount of damage to. Each of the characters also has 3 talents, and you will pick one. So the talents for a fighter are know the measure of your foe, count a failure as a success versus hazards with beast, humanoid, or monster. So that's kind of their chosen foe. I don't know much, but I know how to hit things. When you use a violence to negotiate hazards, you can take a -1 to your roll. So, you want to roll low, so a -1 is good. And then protect the weak points. When you reduce a hazard's HP, pick another Dungeoneer as your ward. That hazard cannot reduce your ward's destiny by more than 1 per round, once per room. And then we get to pick 3 different things to take with us in our Adventurer's Pack. The fighter has access to 50 feet of hempen rope, 5 torches, a bedroll, 1 week's worth of rations, a flask of ale, a carafe of wine, oilcloth, a whetstone, throwing daggers, and a small powder keg. If you use one of these items in the way that you are trying to engage with a hazard, as long as you use one, then you get a -1 to your roll. So using your items in creative ways will allow you to overcome challenges. And then also here we have our D6 look and armaments. So what does our fighter look like? They are burly, sweat-stained, and heavy armor, and they come with a hand axe and a round shield. So that was kind of a deep dive there into the fighter. We also have magic users, and they can have alchemical creations. We have priests, and priests, of course, can turn undead or have different prayers. We have our ranger. The ranger has a bestial alliance, so they can negotiate. They can have a beast companion, howl at the moon, query worth facing. We have our thief. Of course, thieves are good at overcoming traps, so they are really good against traps and poison. And then here we have our list of backstory prompts. So what is your character? The backstory here of our fighter. If we were to generate our fighter, an academic fighter, maybe he was an old professor at some school, maybe an archaeologist or something. And so he wanted to leave the confines of his ivory tower and go out and actually do some adventuring. What is he known for? Maybe they're known for saving an endangered species. And why is he going on this one final mission? What kind of debt does he have to pay? Legal fees. So maybe the school sued him because he left breaking his contract or something like that. So this will tell you what you as the players are doing in the tavern, how to establish connections, and how to think about your destined death when you draw that card to figure out what tag you are supposed to die to. This is pretty funny here. Now, let's say you've created your character, everybody's around the table, and then, I don't know, your mom calls and tells you have to come home and take out the garbage. Well, in that case, you can die in the tavern instead of dying in the dungeon. And maybe you spontaneously combust. So I don't know, just a little bit of humor there. I kind of like that though. But then you'll get all of your rules on how you are supposed to play when you are in a dungeon and what you're trying to do. Maybe let's take a look at it at an example here. So we are in the gallery, and so the dungeon keeper would describe this gallery as maybe pick one of these that there is lightning-filled tubing. So it's kind of this arcane light is scattered about the wall. Maybe it's following the contours of the gallery, and it's creating this kind of eerie blue, kind of unearthly light, and it makes us feel very weird. And there might be an abomination or an ooze or a monster in here. Now, if one of our tags was one of those and we were at Destiny 0, we could choose to have our character die against that tag. But what the Dungeon Keeper would do is they would turn to the book here to get some more information about those hazards. And so one of the hazards that it suggests is a mimic, and that would be under the abomination page here. So each of the hazards in the dungeon manual has a D6 chart that you can roll on. So you could look at the abomination. You could choose what it says as the suggested, a mimic, or you could also roll a D6. And if you rolled a 2 there, you would have a half owl, half bear. This arcane amalgam hoots and claws its way through life with exactly the kind of existential confusion you might expect. So this owlbear here has 7 hazard points or 2d6 hazard points if you want to randomize it. They will do D3 destiny damage if the players fail to overcome this hazard. And then there are also some optional tags here of beast and monster. So as a fighter, I would say, well, you know what? I am just going to bash the owlbear over the head, but I'm not a very good fighter. I only have a 4 here. And so I would try to use my skill. So I need to roll a 1, 2, or a 3, and a 6. All right. So I would have failed to bash that owlbear over the head, and it would do D3 points of damage to my destiny. So that would be 2 points of damage to my destiny, and then you would continue like that. Now, some of the hazards will have optional rules, such as this sentient stomach. This fleshy bag of acid dissolved creatures and objects, wobbles around, grabbing unwary dungeoneers and jamming them into its various orifices. All right, 28 hazard points there. It does D6 damage. And it also has a variant rule. So this is unstable skin sac. If this hazard's HP is reduced by 14 or more in one round, it bursts. Reduce its hazard points to 0 and reduce the destiny of any dungeoneers not out of harm's way by D3. So it kind of explodes there. And so you have all kinds of different ways to handle those hazards. You could draw a standard deck or standard playing card here, and you could look at the hearts there. So hearts are on page 8. And then we drew the king. So we would be in a vault. And this vault could be smooth metal walls or small rooms with barred doors, walls of locked boxes, patches of rust and flaking metal. Suggested tags, we have fire, poison, and traps. So let's say some of these are trapped. So then we could turn to our trapped hazards. And we could roll a d6 to determine what kind of trap is in this room, and that is an arrow trap. And this also gives you a little bit of information here. So a trap hazards with the trap tag have this rule. While the hazard has full hazard points, reduce d6 additional destiny on the first failure. So the first person to encounter that trap is going to take a lot more damage than the subsequent players. If we have an acid trap here, we have this or arrow trap. This intricate projectile launcher is commonly set into floors and walls, triggered by stepping through a tripwire or stepping on a pressure plate. It only has 4 hazard points, so pretty easy to take care of. It does D3 damage to us, and it might have an optional tag of poison. And so if you were to take damage, let's say my tag, my destined death tag for my fighter was poison, but I came across this arrow trap and I failed to engage with it. I failed to succeed. I failed my check against the arrow trap, and I took D3 destiny points of damage. I rolled that. I took 3. That was to take my fighter down to 0. And then I could take that optional tag of poison to say, oh my gosh, I was poisoned. And so now I have succumbed to poison. And that is my character's death. When characters die, the players can choose to create a new character, and then they can meet up with the party in between rooms during one of those kind of social interactions. Now, as I said earlier, if the players are able to bring every hazard in a room down to 0 HP, then they can roll on the loot charts. And the loot charts are D66. So let's do red first here. So we have 33. So if I was a player and I could find a lead-lined net, and this would be take a -3 on the roll to negotiate a hazard with the mage tag. And only these dungeoneers can use it, fighters, rangers, and thieves. And it costs 2 destiny to use. I think the loot is pretty cool in this game because it does have a cost, which I like when characters have a currency to spend in order to do certain things. I like that there are restrictions, and I like that there are actually gameplay mechanisms. The loot is not just the loot that you find is not just narrative based. It has mechanical rules for each one. So I do think that is pretty cool. And that the loot chart is here in the back of your Dungeoneer manual or your dungeon manual. So yeah, so that was a quick look at the Dungeoneer's Handbook, the Dungeon Manual, and the Dungeon Keeper's Guide. I'm sure, as you can tell, just thinking about the game, that it would be a lot of fun, especially with some adult beverages, sitting around the table, coming up with jokes with your friends and laughing at the creative ways that the players will come up with to use those tags to make their heroes die in glorious, heroic, and violent ways. I think especially if you could do a chain reaction of heroes dying one after another, kind of like this twisted Rube Goldberg machine or something like that. If the game is starting to go long and maybe it's starting to wear out its welcome a little bit, any player at any time can declare a last stand, and then the next room is where everybody will die. Or what I was thinking, if you just wanted to play a random game, you could take a certain number of cards and then mix the last stand in with the bottom part of that deck. And then you could just play through these, and then the end of the game would trigger when that last stand card comes up or something like that. I think they recommend playing through for a long game, about 7 rooms. So there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of different options for playing this game, playing it solo or playing with friends, or just using this stuff to maybe augment some of your other solo RPGs. I think the dungeon manual would probably be the most useful to people who are just looking to use this as a tool for something else. And I don't know if you can buy each book separately. I doubt it. It comes as a package on itch.io. I'm not sure how much it is on itch.io. I don't know if the dungeon manual would be worth it if you're just looking at it as a tool, but I can see this being pretty useful for coming up with dungeons on the fly. So yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this look at You Meet in a Tavern, You Die in a Dungeon. This is a game that while I bought for solo, I'm not sure it excels at solo play. It's obviously very soloable and you could probably have fun with it, but I think the game's real shining moment will be in kind of convention play or one-off play, or just used as kind of a filler game in between more serious games. Or if you're just having a group of friends together and you want to enjoy some beer and have a good time, kind of a low effort good time, then this might be a game for you. So, all right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.